Good morning, everybody. My name is Ashley Gregory, and I am a transgender woman in recovery. And this is my life story. Well, I was born in July '77. I'm a Leo in a small town called Port Angeles, Washington. It's about a 2-hour drive northwest of Seattle. My biological parents were drug addicts and alcoholics. There was a lot of bikers in my family, so I grew up around drugs, alcohol, partying, and violence from an early age. I had 2 younger brothers that lived with us. Um, there was, sorry, it's real hard to record when the only place you have is the city park. There's a lot of traffic right now. Where was I? Yeah, so my childhood, there was a lot of violence, drugs, alcohol. Um, the night of my 7th birthday was a night that would change my life forever. We were sitting around a bonfire outside our trailer. My uncle, he's a Vietnam vet, had a log cabin. He tried to live off grid, and they were all drinking, doing some sort of crazy drug. I don't know what it was, crack, meth. But my dad was extremely violent that night. He tried to pet my dog, Scruffy. She got scared and ran from him. He grabbed her, dragged her to our firewood chopping block, and cut her head off with an axe. Someone reported it. Within about 2 days later, a bunch of police and child protective services showed up to take my 2 brothers and I away. So then we went through a series of foster homes, eventually landed with the parents that would later adopt us. So, other than the fact that I felt I should have been born female instead of male, I felt a lot more, the women in my family were a lot more, peaceful, calm, and that's how I always felt. The men were always rowdy and violent, so I felt like I should have been born female from a very early age, as early as 5 or 6 that I remember. And so we went to our foster parents that later adopted us when I was just after my 7th birthday. My childhood from then on was pretty normal. Went from never having anything to having everything we could ever need. Always food. My adopted parents told me it took me a long time, but for the first year, I would always scrape half my plate off on my 2 younger brothers to make sure they had enough to eat. I was still worried that we weren't going to have enough, even though they had provided plenty. So I went through school, went through elementary, middle school, no problems. I was a 4-H camp counselor every summer after 6th grade until high school. So that was my first, experience with service work. Then went to high school starting in '91, I believe. I was in a couple of service work clubs like Key Club, Students Against Drunk Driving. Played Vince and Larry, the crash test dummies at parades and fairs. And all the way through school, all the way through graduation, I always thought that anyone who touched drugs or alcohol were bad people. So I didn't want to wind up like my parents, so I never touched drugs or alcohol until later. I went all the way through high school, never even going to a party. Got my first job as a grocery bagger in high school. Then I graduated high school and joined the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is where all my problems started. If I could start over, I would do it again. I love the Marines. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. But I gave in to peer pressure after then. One of my friends kept bugging me to drink with him because the drinking age was 17 back then on base. And I was always like, no, I got stuff to do. And finally one day, after we were stationed in Japan, the same friends like, come on, man, don't you want to experience it? What if we go to war and you never got to know what it's like to drink? And I was thinking, I was like, I always wanted to try sake, and we were living in the country where sake comes from. So I spent my first night drinking hot sake. It was the grossest thing I ever tasted, but I loved the way it made me feel. And before I came out transgender, alcohol was the first thing I ever tried that I was like, oh my God, this is filling a void. I've always wanted to know what to fill it with. So I started drinking like maybe a night on the weekends. After a few months, I started drinking 2 nights on the weekends. That went by. I started drinking every night on the weekends, and by the end, I was drinking every night off duty. And I got into a lot of trouble on and off base. At the end, I was facing 10 years in a Japanese prison, but they didn't want a young American caught up in their prison system, so they worked a deal out with my command that they would get me out, or they would drop the charges as long as they moved me to a different base. So then I was given the choice of either finishing my last year, but not re-enlisting or retiring, or I could opt out to discharge early. I thought I would still get an honorable discharge, so I opted to discharge early because my original goal was to stay until retirement. But since I couldn't retire, there was no point in staying in. But I was court-martialed, and I was given other than honorable discharge. I kept in contact with a friend of mine from boot camp, and I moved back home to Port Angeles. There was nothing for work really besides fast food, so I was going to go on a fishing boat to Alaska, but I didn't want to work in the cold weather. I really hate cold weather. And a friend of mine lives in Florida. His family's from Cuba, and he was like, "Hey, man, I'll pay for you to move down here if you want to try Florida out." So I was like, "Hell yeah!" So he paid for me to move all my stuff, and I moved to Florida. Everything was going good for a little bit. I was still underage, under the 21-year drinking age, so I couldn't drink unless I got a friend to buy me alcohol. And I was working, trying to save up for my own place, living at my friend's house on his couch. Then I started hanging out with the wrong crowd. I was hanging out on A1A Strip, the road on a beach in Florida, goes up the west coast, or the east coast, I mean, and just chilling on with my guitar. Started talking to some people. There were a bunch of punk rockers out there, a bunch of homeless kids, and I started smoking weed with them. After that, I was trying to find something that would give me the adrenaline rush I felt as a Marine. So I started using other stuff like coke, crack cocaine, pills. At one point, I was injecting crack into my arm. I got so addicted that I was addicted to sticking the needle in my arm, not the drug itself. So one day I happened to look at myself in the mirror, realize how much weight I lost. I was like, man, I gotta get away from this stuff. So I packed up, walked to the next city. And it was Naples, Florida. I lived there for about 10 years, homeless most of the time, drinking, partying. It was going to be the next Sid Vicious, next drunken punk rocker. That never happened. Met my ex-wife there. We had her daughter. Then she cheated on me, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna go. I was gonna go live with my father-in-law up in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I moved up there. While I was up there, back in MySpace's prime, I met a girl that I've known since the second grade, so for like 30-something years. And we were talking about hooking up. So she was like, yeah, my grandma was buying all of us a house, and we moved to Oklahoma, so do you want to hook up? And I was like, sure. So she bought me a Greyhound ticket, and I moved to McAlester, Oklahoma. Then her grandmother bought us a house in Muskogee, Oklahoma, where I've been the past 13 years. But yeah, so my drinking continued. My ex-fiance, she had loved me for a long time. She said she had made plans when we were in the second grade of getting married and having kids, and then her family moved away sometime in late middle school, and I never saw her for over 10 years, 15 years. So I put her through a lot. She thought that either I would get tired of drinking and quit, or she would be able to get me to quit. But after about 4 incidences where we got into fights and I was charged with domestic violence, she finally gave up. And 2018, I was released from jail after she broke up with me, moved into the Gospel Rescue Mission where I'm at again. I had about 8 months, 3 weeks of sobriety then. I was going to AA and different programs like Doorways of Hope, Celebrate Recovery. I was going to church, attending classes at Gospel Rescue Mission. Everything was going good until I got my own apartment. I decided to drink one day, then I decided to drink another time, 2 or 3 other times, and I was back in active addiction, drinking and drinking. After 3 years of admitting drinking to my parole officer, she finally decided, well, I either got to put you in a program or I'm going to have to violate you and revoke your parole and send you back to prison for 5 years. So I decided to try this program out called Mental Health Court. And I was doing good for a little bit. I came out in, what was it, after deciding that I was having problems with all my relationships because I actually wanted to become female. I started researching and discovered what transgender meant. Before, I'd always thought transgender and transsexual people were just drag queens, people that cross-dress. And after I researched it, I said, hey, that's what I am. So I came out over Facebook in April 2020. Last year, after I was in mental health court, the judge signed the document so I can change my name from... Oh yeah, I've skipped a part. When I was adopted in the 8th grade, I changed my name from my birth name, Timothy, to Scott Gregory, Leighton Gregory. And then last year, when the judge granted my name change, I changed it the third time to Ashley Gregory. And I also changed my gender. I was doing good. I had the same job for most of 3 years, working at a bottling factory called Refresco. Had my apartment for 4 years. Then I started missing appointments, and the judge sanctioned me to 6 months in jail. Since I'm pre-op transgender, I couldn't be put in with women, but since I'm legally a male, I can't be put in with men. Plus, I worried for my life being put in with men. So I was in solitary confinement for 3 months. After 3 months, the judge decided that was enough time and released me. I lost my apartment. I'm back at Gospel Rescue Mission. I've got 5 months and a week sober. I'm chairing an AA meeting every week, and I'm chairing an NA meeting every week. I'm going to be speaking for the first time over an online AA group this Sunday at 7:15. So if you're interested, look up Eye Openers, and the Zoom code is 407-807-130. And I just got my first COVID shot. I got to go in for a second one, and then I'll be carrying the message to prison inmates, going to rehabs. And thank you for listening to an abbreviation of my life story, and talk to you soon. Bye.